Well, hello, welcome to the video. This one's about a day in the life, a week in the life, whatever you want to say, of a pub rock promoter back in London in the 1980s. That's me, by the way. And at this point, like I say, if you can hear noises outside, if you can hear rain and strong winds, that's because outside there were rain and strong winds. It all fits in place, doesn't it? It all makes sense in the end. Let's go back, see what happened to me on a typical day in, say, 1988 at the Cricketers Kennington Oval, London SC11. That was just over the river from the West End of London. You could walk over. I'm very careful what I say, because last time I actually said this, somebody measured it and pointed out I was wrong. So we were just south of Vauxhall, so you could cross by Vauxhall Bridge, or you could go a bit further towards the West End and go over, what's it called, Lambeth Bridge, that's right, or a bit further still and go over Westminster Bridge. You had a choice. So that's where we were, and the day used to start probably for me about 9 o'clock. I'd get out of bed, because don't forget we'd been working late, and I'll come to that later. So I'd get out of bed and I'd have a cup of coffee. They'd probably be downstairs working in the bar, because I ran the front of house, the bands, and obviously the landlord, Kenny, ran the bar, and so they'd be stocking up, they'd be putting bottles back on the shelves and things that had been sold, and they'd be cleaning and washing the glasses and stuff like that, and cleaning the toilets and other lovely things like that. And so I'd probably have a chat with them, go and have a cup of coffee, and Kenny would tell me where I've been going wrong, and I'd suggest things, and we'd just have a chat. So, and then by this stage, Rebecca, who worked for me at that time, would probably turn up, and we'd have a cup of coffee and have a chat. Oh yes, we had a lot of cups of coffee and lots of chats. And then we'd start to go through the post, because in those days, the post came quite early, and so there'd probably be a pile of cassettes sent in by bands, and there'd be a lot of other stuff, probably contracts from agents and that sort of thing, and promotional materials from various record companies and whatever. So we'd go through all that, and that would take us up to lunchtime, and then we'd probably go out to lunch at the Palmer Cafe, which was at Vauxhall, which was like, what, 200 or 300 yards up the road, and we'd go there, which is a Turkish run cafe, and Tom would welcome us and have a chat and then a cup of coffee, and it'd all be jolly. So this is that part of the day. I missed out the bits where I'd have to ring people up, or people would ring me up, because in those days we didn't have mobile phones or the internet, we'd have landlines. So basically the phone would ring and it would be an agent trying to sell you a band. The difficulty, when there's so many pub rock venues in London, which there were at the time, there were, I would say, possibly 100 in the course of London. Not all of them were of the same standard, because obviously bands prefer to play, and the managers especially, and the record companies prefer to put bands places where they're going to be seen by more people. Better, because there were like, I don't know, there were like degrees of success in the pub rock game. Somewhere like the Nashville Rooms would be at the top of the tree, and somewhere like an unknown pub, I don't know, the Swan in East Ham or whatever, would be at the bottom of the tree. And the Cricketers would probably be, because I really strove to make it a good place. I really tried to get the best bands there, and often we succeeded. And it had a reputation, and it was, quite close to the West End, so we got a lot of record company people in, and bands generally liked playing there, so that was good. So I'd say we were probably 3/4 the way up the tree. Maybe a bit higher, maybe a bit lower, I don't know. And so you got, like, it would depend on what type of music you were into. Because at the time, there were so many different types of music. There was psychobilly, rockabilly, there was ska, there was reggae, there was, you name it, country, there was like cowpunk, there was Irish punk, there was Irish cowpunk, there was Welsh cowpunk, there was every type of music that you could think of. I mean, there were so many different types, and we used to put on as many different types of things within reason, because like there was types we didn't really go to. Like, to be honest with you, I did attempt to put on heavy metal bands, and like the sound engineer we had quite often, Neil, he worked with a band called Thunder, who you may have heard of, who were quite big from Blackheath, I think, which is just up the road. And they played there occasionally, but they never really did that well, because basically that type of band, the heavy rock bands, the rock bands, used to work in places where people used to go especially to watch them. Like, I remember there was a place in Whitechapel, I can't remember the name of the pub, it was on Bethnal Green Road, Red Eagle or something like that, which specialised in it. There was a famous one where Iron Maiden started, and I can't remember what it was. It was in Leighton, I think. And that was where those sort of, because I never went to those sort of places, because it wasn't my sort of bag. So we tend not to do heavy metal and hard rock too much. Obviously, People now say, oh, I had Steve Marriott on. Well, Steve Marriott to me wasn't particularly heavy metal and hard rock. Don't forget, the 80s was not that far after the time when he was in the Small Faces. I know he did his best to change his image, and he liked playing in things like Humble Pie more than he liked playing in the Small Faces, apparently, especially afterwards. I mean, he still was very populist. I mean, he was a very good entertainer, was Steve Marriott. A lot of his stuff was sing-along stuff, and it was a Small Faces thing, and everybody enjoyed it. And I know he tried Humble Pie end of it, but frankly, the audience wanted what they wanted, and Steve was enough of a showman and entertainer to give people what they wanted. So most of the bands we booked weren't with agencies, so like your Morrissey Mullins or your Gino Washington or your Rent Party or your Howling Wolf. You would ring up somebody in the band who would do the bookings, or occasionally it was a girlfriend of one of the band members or a wife. Like Wilko Johnson's wife, Irene, actually was the person you rang to book Wilko Johnson back then. So make a few phone calls when we go back from lunch. We'd probably made a few phone calls in the morning between cups of coffee and stuff. Quite often we'd take it easy from about 4 o'clock onwards, because at 5 o'clock, that was when the doorbell would ring and there would be a band outside wanting to get in, because bands bring their gear in at 5 o'clock, that was the theory, and they put it on the stage and they sound checked, and the sound engineer turned up at 5 o'clock. At this point, I'd like to say, join in with what's going on, comment, let me know what you think, like it if you like it, subscribe, and let's get on with it. Usually in the sound checks there'd be two bands, sometimes when it's something like Paul Ronan or Eric Hans, who unfortunately I mentioned in my last video and he's since passed away, R.I.P. Eric, a very good friend of mine, and they would put on maybe 4 or 5 bands. I mean, this is the thing, so they'd play half an hour each, and so they'd be sharing gear, hopefully. I mean, the easy sound checks were people like Gino Washington and the Ram Jam Band, who everybody in the band knew what they were doing. They'd done it 100 times before, and the sound check would probably take half an hour all in. And the same with someone like Steve Marriott or something like that. But then you get the bands who had just started out, weren't quite sure.
Just a touch more.
Shut up.
Can go up a little bit higher, can't it? I know. All right, just another 2 or 3 notches. Good. Yes. Oh, well, just a little bit more. Okay. Up, just a touch.
Bloody hell, who's all those lagers?
You had bands who had a lot of instruments, like especially the folky type of things, so they take a bit longer, but generally speaking, sound checks were, I mean, are you supposed to swear in this, but they were basically, nobody liked them, not even the people in the bands, especially the older members. I think the younger members of the bands probably liked them because it was part of the showbiz thing, but after a while, you didn't like the sound checks, and you just wanted them to be over, and then 8 o'clock, the doors would open and people would come in. Now, there'd be a guest list, and normally we try to keep the guest list quite down because we only held 200 people at the Cricketers. Sometimes there'd be long guest lists, but that would be agreed in advance. Say the band were like doing a promo and they wanted a lot of guests in, and that would probably be reflected in their price. Because don't forget, even though we're running a pub, we're running the music side of a pub, we have to make money, because as I said in my last video, there were probably 10 people from that pub who earned their livelihood out of that pub. And from my side of it, the music side of it, there were probably 4 or 5 people per night who were reliant on me making a profit, and the band would want to make a profit. And generally speaking, I think that 90% of people there made money and everybody was happy. Occasionally you get a band who would ring you up and say that they can pull, oh, can we play at your pub? We want to do a London show and we can get 150 people there. We'll bring coaches from blah, blah, blah. And then they turn up, of course, that they were lying to you and they're no coaches, and they say things like, well, would you give me a gig if we had to said all that? And of course, then there's 5 people there. There's no money to pay anybody, and there's temples get things. So that's when things went wrong. But generally speaking, you would know what was going to happen. So anyway, that was generally it. It would end by 11 o'clock. We'd try and get the blast band off by about 10 to 11 if we could, so that people had to go and catch tubes to go a long way to go home. And if people want to stay and have a drink before they went, they could get a drink before the bar closed. What you didn't want was the band playing after time, neighbours complaining, blah, 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 blah. So you try and get them off by 10 to 11, then everybody's happy. And for some reason, people used to moan about that. I don't know why, because it just makes sense. If you want to stay for a drink afterwards, you stay for a drink afterwards. If you want to go, you go. What's the problem there? So that was basically the normal day. It would vary according to which day of the week. Sunday nights would be an earlier finish, plus we'd have a lunchtime show. I generally wouldn't get involved in that because the bands on lunchtime would normally have their own PAs and they set it up. But occasionally we'd be engaged, if you like, to do the PA. So that would be Sunday lunchtime. Sometimes afterwards we would be a bit daft and have a takeaway. I would probably order something from the Kennington Tandoori or the Hong Kong Garden, I think it was called, the Chinese takeaway, and we'd have that at that time of night. Because don't forget, back then there was no TikTok or Facebook or Instagram saying to you, don't eat anything after 9 o'clock, otherwise you're gonna get blah 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 and all that. Because it was all no internet, nothing like that. So you made up your own rules. And were we any worse for it? I don't think so. Anyway, so that was the general thing of the evenings and during the day normally. Occasionally we'd have special things to do, like on Fridays it would either be a trip to Paddington, because the 36 bus went past the Oval cricket ground where the Cricketers was, and it would go all the way to Queen's Park, I think, passing through Marble Arch and Paddington. And we would go to Paddington because in Praed Street, Paddington, was a place called Printersec, where we'd get our flyers printed. Now I used to try and do them by hand. I used to do like calligraphy, poor man's calligraphy, not very good, not great. And it worked. It was a style that people recognised. So I used to do that whenever I could. Occasionally I did it with an electric typewriter and people didn't seem to like that. So it was a lot easier with an electric typewriter. But here's a little secret. We used to do it on graph paper, actually, a light blue graph. So that's why we got things generally into boxes and lined up. Malcolm from the Robey and I used to do a few things together. And we used to occasionally buy these when we were out, because we used to do a run once a week or once every 2 weeks, where we'd go out and we'd put up posters in record shops and put leaflets in record shops. And we'd drink a lot of coffee and have a lot of cakes. And we used to go into art shops and buy stuff like that and art pens and things. Because both of you used to do our own leaflets and listings and things. And for some reason, we called the graph paper photo stumpfen paper. Don't ask me why, just a little in-joke we had, which was like 50 years ago, and it doesn't make any sense to me now, but it probably did then. Anyway, going back to Printersec, we go to Paddington. I do one, so basically it could possibly be A4, because then it's easy, it looks better when it's squashed down. They'd copy it and we'd get probably 2,000, 2,500 of these done, which would last us, it depends actually. When we're getting low, I do more. So Paddington in those days wasn't like as posh as it is now. Paddington in the 1980s was quite a working class area still. Obviously there was the station there, but there was a lot of stuff going on as well. Like I used to work in a nightclub at Paddington Station before this in the 1970s called Fangs, and it was downstairs in the station in the basement there, and we used to get a lot of what you'd call local gangsters used to drink in there. So, and all that was going on. It was like Notting Hill was very close and Potterville Road and all that. So it was quite a lively area. And so we used to go there, and there was a fantastic Indian takeaway, a tiny place where they used to cook everything. Some of it would be already prepared, like the rice and stuff like that. But they would do very good vegetarian food and non-vegetarian food. And it would be so cheap. It's something like £1 or something for a plate. And that was a little treat. So we used to eat there, and then we had to get back for when the band were turning up for sound checks. And as I've alluded to with Malcolm from the Robey, he had a car and I didn't. We used to meet somewhere, and we normally start, because we used to do these on a Thursday and a Friday, because a lot of these places weren't open apart from at the weekend. So we start normally in Honest John's, which would be at the top end of Portobello Road, and we'd go down and we'd park the car up, and then we'd walk up, and then we'd go through there and we'd go down Portobello Road, and we go to another one I can't remember the name of, on the right hand side going down towards Notting Hill, which was a small one, which was run by a guy who was, actually there was a shop there which was like not a record shop as such, but it's a hippie shop run by a guy who'd been quite influential in the South African anti-apartheid movement, and he was quite famous. I can't remember his name. He was a softly spoken South African man, and it was like a head shop sort of thing, and they sold records and things like that there. And that would be a good place to leave flyers, and then we go down a bit further and then be Rough Trade Records, because there wasn't one at those days in Shoreditch. It was just the one there, Notting Hill Gate they called it, even though it was in Portobello Road. And then there's another one, I think, further on. And then we'd go back in the car and we'd go to the next place, which would be Notting Hill Gate, the Record and Tape Exchange. And so there you go, that's what we did. And we'd go around those places, and usually we'd try and drop off listings in Time Out, in the NME, in Sounds and the Melody Maker. and all the rest of it we just sent off by post. So anyway, we'd do that, and then we'd end up, and all the time we're going along, we'd be drinking coffee and cakes, and we tend to go to places like Persian coffee shops and Turkish coffee shops and have all sorts of exotic pastries and baklava and stuff like that. And it would be more a social thing, actually, to be honest with you. And then he'd go off to do, because he used to play with Chanter and with Irish Mist, the two Irish acts that used to play in all the clubs and the pubs in the Irish music world in London. And I used to go and do the door at the Cricketers. And there you go. So that was pretty much every week. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, please come back and do it again. This video might be the one you're looking for. Thank you.